Welcome to today's edition of the Sick Society podcast. Along with Alexis and I, we've got Dr. Duane Mellor to talk today about food and diet and how those interact with our health. Duane, do you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Dr. Mellor. I'm primarily a dietitian. I work clinically in the NHS. I also dabble in a little bit of research, have a past life working in universities as an academic. I still hold honorary positions at Aston University and one at the University of Canberra in Australia.
Great, welcome.
It might help if we just try and untease the whole thing about what's a dietitian, what's a nutritionist for people listening. Because there's a lot of people who purport to be experts in diet and food and give us all sorts of advice that we're supposed to follow. What's the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist?
So in my case, I'm both. I'm a registered dietitian in the UK. It's important to say which jurisdiction you're in because within the UK, it is a legally protected title. Being a doctor, isn't it? Because also mentioned the doctor title, I have a PhD. I'm not a medical doctor. So I have an RD, registered dietitian, which is a legally protected title as a dietitian, which means I can work with individuals who manage their health conditions, their diseases, with partly or completely with diet, depending on the condition. So my area of interest is diabetes. So I support people living with diabetes to know what's in their food so they can match their insulin doses. My main job. A nutritionist, we do have a voluntary register in the UK, and I'm on that voluntary register, and you have to keep up your level of continuing professional development, follow the ethical codes in a similar way to being dietitian. But there are also nutritionists who are not on that register because that's not yet a legally protected title. So most nutritionists will have a degree, but they may have less than a degree. Quite a few have masters or PhDs. Then you have people who are sort of various nutritional therapists who have varying levels of qualifications, some of which have a separate sort of voluntary registration, which is quite different indeed. And so then you have people sort of advise people on sort of supplements and other things. And, you know, it's possible to describe yourself as one of these nutritional experts when you've got a diploma off the internet and not necessarily signed up to a code of ethics and conduct, continuing to develop your learning and also have a sort of a good underpinning education in not just nutrition, but how the human body works and sort of the wider context, some of the social issues we've been talking about today.
Now, it's customary to ask people to tell us what they've eaten for breakfast as a sound check. But I think given what our topic is today, I'm quite interested to know what this is. So I'm going to ask everyone to tell me what they have for breakfast today, but for the first time, I'm going to record it.
I had homemade sourdough bread with a variety of cheeses on it.
Well then.
Yes.
That sounds very nice.
A bit of fermentation in there, that's good. I'd never have breakfast, so I just have coffee in the morning.
I don't know how you live on it shocks me.
Yeah, it's another episode. The evidence that you need a big breakfast and the breakfast best meal of the day is at best flawed.
And mostly potentially linked to industrial influences who have sold us something to eat for breakfast which we perhaps don't need in our diets.
Oh.
That's another debate.
I had a McDonald's breakfast.
Should we move on?
Breakfast of champions. Yeah, sausage, egg McMuffin, hash brown, a latte. I did also go to the gym and do an hour of very vigorous, very heavy weightlifting.
Okay. Resistance, good. The egg McMuffin, less so. The hash brown, even less so.
Oh.
But at least you didn't have the strawberry shake, which is a whopping 900 odd.
Oh, no, I don't know. So I will say this.
Sup.
So a sausage, egg McMuffin and a hash brown are literally the only thing I eat at McDonald's. And I do it about 4 times a year. So but it's the only thing I eat. I won't have anything else at McDonald's.
My favourite McDonald's is a filet of fish.
Interesting.
Because I was semi-vegetarian when I was a kid. And so McDonald's opened, I was born in Plymouth, very proud of it, being Devonian, but actually my formative years in Epsom, so very middle class, suburbia. Anyway, and McDonald's opened in Epsom whilst I was a teenager. And we used to dash out of school, dive into McDonald's for lunch and come back. But I was semi-vegetarian at that time, so I used to go the filet of fish. And something about the tartar sauce, probably its high salt content or something like that, I just absolutely love. And it remains a treat. Likewise, I'll have it 2-3 times a year. But how much of that was set when I was a kid? And it was that excitement and that initial pull that got me through the door, got me eating the high salt, high sugar food that got me addicted. So it remains a buzz and a hit.
Probably.
Discuss.
Similarly, so the sausage, egg McMuffin, and hash brown, I discovered that when I was at university, and that plus a Diet Coke was the cure to any hangover. And so I will choose it on mornings where I'm not feeling top.
Do we need to be clear that scientifically proven there's only one cure for a hangover, and that's abstinence?
Yeah, I'm not sure we should go down the rabbit hole of yet another type of addiction that you've just opened up there. But again, that's another episode.
Other hangover cures are available. How about that?
But there's only one proven to work.
There's only one proven to work. That's true. Choose it, should you so desire. And I should point out I was not hungover this morning. I unfortunately was awake at 4 a.m. with our 2-year-old.
Duane, you've got that look about you. You're not quite sure what to make of our discussion about fast food.
Well, it's commercialization of our food. It's sort of a homogenization of our food supply, and we've kind of lost touch with what food is. That might be what we're probably going to get onto at some point. Is that have we lost touch what food is and how to enjoy food? Because you're saying it's something you've been driven, it's some impregnated, but how often do we spend time to enjoy what we eat?
That's a good point.
Socially, our lives generally revolve around food and drink, particularly in the Western world. And a lot of those habits are built up in childhood. So families that eat together, stay together and all that sort of stuff, and that people who sit around a table and have a meal and that's their one time to catch up and no devices and things. That was certainly a bit of a rule in our household where the kids were growing up, and it was a very good way for us to eat good food. Nikki is a fantastic cook, but get us all around the table chatting. I'm still staggered when I hear the stats about how many people don't sit down and have a meal together as a family in the evening. And that's partly because of our busy lives, but also because the types of food that are available and when people eat them.
Well, and also, I remember reading a couple months ago about how dining rooms are no longer something that people are looking for in houses, because people are just doing away with dining tables altogether because of the shift in how we eat. When we're thinking about how to eat better, we often focus on nutrition. But do you think where we eat or who we eat with is as important?
I think the more time I spend, and particularly working with families, quite often you're saying slow down, which is a really odd thing to say. You can look at the science, you can look at the molecules in the food, but quite often it's how are you consuming it? Are you eating quickly? Particularly if you're looking at sort of supporting people with weight management and even weight loss. The speed they eat, the things they choose to eat, how quickly they can eat it, all seem to be part of the problem as well. Because if we just look at the idea of calories, that message hasn't really worked. If we look at reducing the fat, it doesn't work. Doing more exercise doesn't seem to work. We need to actually look. And is it culturally, we've lost touch with some of those things about why we eat, not just what we eat, why we eat, because we eat together for a reason. Anthropologists have suggested it's because we stopped having fur to pick fleas off each other and groom each other that way. We share food as an act of bonding. You go through any society, you have in sort of Western Christianized culture, you have the acts of communion, which is a shared meal. You have the festives, you have in Islam, you have the feasts after things like Ramadan when you have Eid, and it's about sharing food and sharing food outside your family with others to bring the community in. And have we lost touch with that with our modern, all the same sort of high street foods, very similar packaged foods in our supermarkets, and not actually being almost attached to that very real, that very natural thing of what food is?
It does make you think, doesn't it? So every year we go to France, normally in the summer as a family. And I always joke that where we go must be in some sort of space-time continuum, because we kind of eat what we want. It's France, right? We're having pastries, we're eating cheese, but we're eating together. And I think we are eating more slowly. And we all always come back having lost weight. And that's why I always say, this just, there's some sort of rift in the time.
So you have your own personal version of the French paradox then?
Yes. We've never had a summer where we've come back and gained weight.
Are you smoking those sort of dark cigarettes as
no,
well?
No, I promise. There are no other addictive substances are consumed.
Although the French paradox is unwinding, isn't it? I'm told, as fast food and other things seeps into French society more.
And I've done work with sort of Greek epidemiology, and that's unwinding as well.
Okay.
So if you look, we haven't actually got the paper published because life got in the way, but we looked at the concept of Greek Orthodox fasting, and sort of there's data, particularly, it seems to be mainly Greek nuns who sort of have their long periods of, it's a vegetarian period or vegan periods where they reduce oil and alcohol and other things in their diet, and basically just eat vegetables for sort of Lent before Christmas and that period in August. And they seem to have better cardiovascular health, which is not surprising because you're eating a very simple Mediterranean type diet. However, they've introduced processed foods that can fit into that bracket, and the benefits might be disappearing. And sort of the traditional diet, Mediterranean diet, which was more of what was available rather than a kebab, which some people who go on holiday to the Mediterranean think it is disappearing. And again, it's being more sort of mopped up into this mixed, what you could call international or hybridized cuisine, which is all about speed.
So the whole thing of ultra-processed food and its potential relationship between increases in cancer and obesity rates, how much do you buy into that? Is it the great evil that some people would say it is, or is it everything's multifactorial? But how much of a factor is it in the grand scheme?
So can we take the high fat, salt, sugar element out of it? Very hard to do because we desire high fat, salt, sugar. It's ingrained in our biology that we desire these foods. You know, there's work been done in America and Washington where they've actually found that sweet spot that exists in both rats and humans, which happens to be a donut. So you've got the perfect balance of sugar and fat together that we can't distinguish between the fat and sugar. Because if you just give fat, we can have a certain amount of fat and we enjoy it. Then we go a little bit high and like, oh, that's a bit too much fat. Similarly with sugar, oh, that gets too sweet. Put them together, we lose our inhibition for both. That's in rats and humans.
Interesting.
I didn't know that.
But if you look at what we call ultra-processed foods, again, we could look at some of the challenges in that definition. It was defined in Brazil, and basically it wipes almost all bread out of the equation, unless you have sort of artisan type breads, or you happen to have your own little sourdough tucked away in your fridge. Most shop-bought bread will be classed as ultra-processed foods. There are issues that some of the translations that cheese is okay, but tofu and tempeh isn't. But they're both. One is basically something squashed together from milk that's been the protein extracted out of it. Tofu is basically the protein taken out of a soybean, and tempeh is a fermented version of that. So is that a misunderstanding what that food product is from a cuisine which is very different in Brazil and South America to what is seen in Southeast Asia? Mm-hmm. So there are issues with the definition. And the good news is, or bad news, depending on how you feel, tofu can be classed as ultra-processed food, but beer isn't. Spirits are, but, because of the level of processing. So purely on the level of processing, possibly not. Is it about disruption of the foods? So,
right. Yeah.
So what we're saying is if you've got a vegetable, it's got its cells intact, like little boxes, which our bodies have to break down. That takes more effort from our bodies, so we don't absorb as much of the energy, the fat, the calories. So having a nut with all the little cell structures in there, we can't get all the fat out of it. But if we have something like instant noodles, we can rip all that energy out of that food really quickly. We don't have to chew it a lot, so we can swallow it quicker. It doesn't allow our bodies to detect we've eaten so much, so we don't feel as full. And we want to eat more of it because it's got that nice hit of salt and those other flavours we like, so we just eat more of it. So is there anything magic about ultra-processed food, or are they just designed to hit those sweet spots that we have in our bodies?
And also, do we need to rethink what it means to have an ultra-processed food? Because I hadn't really thought about that, about how, depending on that definition, you get a pretty big list of things that people would not necessarily consider ultra-processed.
And it's a broad scope. So something like a fish finger will be classed as ultra-processed. But there's a whole range of products that will be in that bracket, from some very sort of fine, sort of fresh caught fish from some nice part of the world that's been wrapped up in sourdough breadcrumbs and seasoned with the finest salts and herbs. Or it could be something that's been reconstituted and wrapped up in other things. They're still a fish finger. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking at some of the assumptions, when you're actually looking at what populations are eating and they're ticking a box, say fish finger on a questionnaire,
you don't know
how
what
do you know
fish
which one
finger
it is?
Yeah. That's a really good point.
And that's a problem when we make a lot of these assumptions. And I think the other thing when we talk about ultra-processed foods and when we talk about food in general, it gets very easy to say, well, this is a middle-class value. And that's why it's difficult to even talk about sitting and eating around a table.
Yeah.
Sitting and eating around other people and not being distracted is more classless than sitting around a table. And then depending on your generation, it's that, oh, you have your posh table and then you have your bench in the kitchen where you can just have a stool up at. Both the same sort of shared space. And then people can start getting judgmental.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we talk about that bread example, the artisan sourdough bread is tick, okay. Your shop bought bread, which most people eat, is not.
Well, and there's a price difference there, and there's a time difference, right? So ultimately, if you want to be ridding your life of ultra-processed food, then surely the gold standard is you make that sourdough starter yourself and you make that bread yourself. You're part of that whole process.
So we've got some very interesting questions there. So is there an element of sexism in that?
Oh, probably.
Because, who historically has done the majority of that work in households? And is that burden of work going to be equally shared between genders now?
No. This would be my very quick. But that being said, I'm not the one that makes the bread in our house, which is probably saying something.
But it's a point. So if we want to go harken back to this ideal, or so-called ideal of food cooked at home, what's that mean to household structures? And we need to be careful. And also in terms of cost, we talk about financial cost of foods, and some people will go, I think there's an MP somewhere in Nottinghamshire, 30p somebody, I can't remember what his name is. But here, vegetables are cheap, anyone can cook a healthy meal. But if you're time poor, because you're rushing around looking after a family, you're doing several jobs, your ability, the time to make decisions about the food you eat is reduced. So your time to cook is squeezed. Your time to think about that food is squeezed, as well as your budget being squeezed.
Just to take that a step further. So one of the themes of our podcast is sort of getting people to think about how they would change their policy if they were a government minister, your minister for food. What are the things that you think we could do on a national level, which might be nanny state, whatever you want to call it, but actually that will facilitate people eating better?
Right. If we go far extremes, start with the far extremes.
Yeah,
I'm not suggesting this is what I'm advocating. Rationing.
Okay.
Because we have data to suggest that the health of the nation was better after a great scientist, Elsie Widdowson, did a lot of work on what the rations were during the 40s when we had a Ministry of Food, and there's enough food that was healthy that kept the country going. Would that be an electable policy? Definitely not, because people want free choice.
Yeah.
So what could we do? We had a very good project that happened about 20 years ago called Children's Centres, where it gave spaces where food could be grown, not because community growing of food has a big nutritional impact. I want to be clear on that. There's a lot of critiques about sort of community growing of food, and you're growing a courgette, that's really not going to feed a community. But having that food there and being able to identify with that food gives you an attachment to it.
It's been a great year for courgettes.
And it's been
My
a good year.
courgettes have been really good. Yeah.
And people are more willing to try things if they've grown them. So you've got a link there. And that could be in schools, it could be in community centres. The Sure Start centres had food work going on. So families didn't have to take the financial risk of trying food with small children because they could prepare and try that in a safe environment. So that took the risk of buying food that would be wasted from a limited budget. So that had a big impact. And the loss of Sure Starts and family centres was probably one of the biggest failures, in my view, of the coalition. And we have seen when those children that went through those processes got to 16, their results and things are quite good. It did have an impact. And we've lost that.
Yeah.
Add COVID on there, we've lost a lot of things. And so society, we've got generations that are struggling because of that. So I'd bring back that sort of food work and community engagement with food.
Would you do that into schools as well? Because something I've noticed with my eldest is that the food is not very adventurous in her school. And as a result, she and her friends are not very adventurous.
So what you could do, and again, we might need to extend budgets, and I'll go into that in a second, in public sector food, because public sector food is the next thing I'd work on. But you'd have an offering of something. So you'd have a taster aspect. So you have your core element, foods that are as healthy as you can get them to minimise food waste, get the children to be fed in a timely way, but you'd have offerings of small things they could try. So again, it's that safe trying of food, to try and get over some of these blocks to trying new food. I think we have a bigger issue, and that goes across hospitals, schools, anywhere in the public sector, that we don't see food as a public service. We see it as a hotel service that we try and keep the cost down low.
Yeah.
And if we look across to Europe, and particularly Scandinavia, they have a different view about food. You can go to a care home setting and they'll have older adults making bread. Because there's an occupational therapy in kneading the dough, then they make the bread and it feels them attached. And they may eat better because they've seen the bread that they've made. Yeah, so you can actually involve bread, sort of food making and other processes in part of that sort of environment. If you look at sort of schools, we have cooking lessons very separate from the school canteen. Why? We lock it down in red tape and health and safety in times, but surely if we want to have an inclusive education system, we could have 14 to 16-year-olds that may be struggling in mainstream school who may thrive in that catering environment. We see examples. I think Aston Villa tried a project where they were trying to look at 16 to 21-year-olds who are not in education or employment and offering them, with a local college, the ability to do catering qualifications, work through the facility of a big organisation such as a football club, and then possibly set up as entrepreneurial skills. Food is a way out of poverty, and we can use that to transform society, because you don't need lots of GCSEs, A-levels, degrees to be successful in the food industry. You just need that little bit of help and the basic skills, so you're not going to kill people. You can give them healthy food, you can provide it, and we can do that. If you want to be more radical, there's lots of fast food shops that are opening and closing. Why don't we sort of put policy in there that every second, every fourth, you can pick a number, it's going to be arbitrary to start off with, could be a sort of a public health controlled one where you're providing healthy street food.
So if you were to bring really high taxation on fast foods and ultra processed foods, or however you want to define it, such that that taxation could then be used to make healthier, in quotes, food such as fruit and veg cheaper, because good fruit and veg is not cheap and takes a hassle to prepare. So finding financial ways to make eating badly more costly than eating well.
So
has anybody done that, and does it work?
This is where we could get really political.
That's
okay?
fine.
So if we actually look, one potential bonus of leaving Europe is we have full flexibility over our value-added tax. That was a luxury tax when it was initially set up, and that's why biscuits are taxed and other foods aren't. We could use a mechanism of VAT to do that quite nicely. We'd have to do it on sort of quantifiable measures. So ultra-processed foods, because of the broad titles, it's not quantitative. It's slightly qualitative in its definition. So we could use high fat, salt, sugar to do that. Why not put VAT on cakes? I know that would sort of squash a very interesting legal ruling that McVitie's had on their Jaffa cake, that it isn't a biscuit, it's a cake. Oh, let's tax cakes as well now. But why not? So we could use VAT levers, because we don't have VAT on vegetables and fresh food.
Yeah.
So we haven't extended VAT and use it to its full potential. And then you could use subsidies for healthy food. Or we could even push that up the supply chain. This is getting very unpopular with some of the commodities industries, and particularly those who move them around. They're big companies that move things like cocoa and sugar and grains around the world, is that we could tax the ingredients. So you could tax things like salt, you could process fats. So that'll then not be a nanny state solution, but it'll be an innovation approach, because it'll drive innovation in the food sector. You could argue it'd be a bigger scale. You need to think this through as a full experiment and then model it before you put it into practice. But you could actually put that in similar way that they did with the soft drinks industry levy.
Well, I was going to say, we know that works because we've seen reduction in sugar consumption through that.
We've had unintended consequences which you need to be guarded against. The glycerol in the slush drinks, which has led to a number of children being admitted to hospital. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, it's very transitory and they all recovered, but you don't want any small child collapsing.
No.
And that was you could argue, a direct consequences of reducing sugar in these slush drinks, which children like. You can't replace it with a simple sweetener like you do in the regular soft drinks. So you need something like glycerol, and glycerol can have a dramatic effect on a small child's body. We need to have safety rails up there.
Yeah, it has to have safety rails for sure. So we've been talking a lot about how to eat better, but one of the drives for why we want to eat better is, of course, underlying all this is that we've got high rates of obesity in the UK. So how do we link these things together in your mind?
I struggle with it because, how do you define obesity? Is it based on body weight alone? Is it based on health? Is it a symptom, or is it actually the problem? Because we don't say, oh, we have too many people coughing. We didn't in the 1960s and 70s say, oh, we've got too many people coughing. We need to stop coughing. We put in measures through the 70s and 80s and 90s and beyond about smoking policy. So if we're looking at sort of obesity, is it we're looking at the health of the population? But with looking at obesity, it's nice and easy that we can stigmatize it because we can identify the people in society who are living with this problem and therefore point as a society at those individuals rather than thinking, have we got a healthy environment? Is our food healthy? Are we allowed to be active? So in some ways, when we look at healthy diets, focusing on obesity, we're losing the point. And we're actually then either putting it as an individual problem. It's a lack of will, it's said to be, which it's not.
No.
There's a large, more than 50% biologically, it is not a choice. Or we can over-medicalize it.
As in it becomes a disease.
It becomes a disease. There are benefits of calling it a disease because then you're taking it away from being the individual's responsibility, and it's part of their biology. It's part of a challenge with their biology. But is the disease the right word, or do we lack the right word to describe what it is? The condition, it's a condition associated with risk. But is it more like that cough, that it's not really?
No, it's not a symptom because it's clear that people who have a high body fat content have an inflammatory process going on. That inflammatory process is probably responsible for their increased risk of various cancers, increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So, and a cough doesn't do that. So I think living with obesity, as is the preferred phrase, sort of assigns that it is a disease process. And I've struggled with this on and off. So Chris Whitty, Chief Medical Officer here in England, would agree with your definition. It's probably not right to call it a disease at the moment, but it sort of sits in the middle, and I've got a lot of time for Chris. However, I think that there is a huge amount of societal individual blame when people are obese or living with obesity, whichever phrase you want to use. And I think we do need to destigmatize that because stigma is one of the big drivers of everything. I can remember I was a big lad when I was a kid. I was overweight, and I'll never forget falling off my stool in a chemistry lesson once, and one of the lads behind me pointed out and said, "Look, you bounced." And that sort of statement, throwaway, very funny, got everybody laughing. Yeah, but that was quite painful, and that probably changed my attitude to my own body at that moment. So I think it's a really hard topic. There's a current vogue saying living with overweight and obesity, and that's a complete, to me, misnomer. Trying to say that you're living with overweight just doesn't sound right, doesn't work. And I think we have to say people are overweight. It's a observation. It's a fair observation. And then if we think that obesity is a disease process, whether we want to call it a disease itself, with a disease process, I'm comfortable with the idea of living with obesity. It is becoming more medicalized now because we now have effective drugs for helping reduce weight in people who are living with obesity. The GLP-1 agonists, glucagon-like peptide agonists, which
the skinny jabs.
They estimate 1.4 million people in the UK are using GLP-1 injections at the moment.
For weight loss?
Yeah. Now, most of that is not prescribed.
Okay.
And that is sourced and funded. So, again, it comes back to the whole thing. This is a group of people who have the wherewithal and the money and the finances to be able to buy these jabs and sort them out. And it has an impressive, but still in the grand scheme of things, a modest effect on your weight loss of 10, 15%. And if you're 40 stone, losing 10 to 15%, losing 4 to 6 stone is a big deal, but it still leaves you overweight to a dangerous degree. But I think we'll get more and more. I think they get more powerful. But the cost then to the NHS, if the NHS then decides that it's going to fund anti-obesity medicines like this, could be absolutely massive, because again, the drug companies rule the game. They can set the prices. And I've seen one estimate that said that if everybody was clinically obese in the UK was to go on a GLP-1 agonist, it would cost about 50 billion a year.
But how much would it save?
That's a good question, because you're going to reduce all those people getting cancer, you're going to reduce them having diabetes, and the onward costs. And I've never seen that.
So that's what I find quite interesting, and that's why I asked that question: is it disease? Is it not? Because whether or not we class it as a disease, there are ramifications for people who live with obesity, right?
And it's quite interesting because I've done some work around the idea of weight stigma, and also sort of looked into the concept of health at every size, which was a very popular. It comes and goes. It was very popular probably about 5-10 years ago, particularly in the dietetic community. And you go like, how do we square all these things together and sort of support people with discussion about GLP-1s and go like, well, how do you do that? In the past, I've worked with total meal replacements, this shakes, soups and shakes to put type 2 diabetes into remission. How do you square that with this idea of not identifying with someone's body shape? And the approach I've taken is, and with the GLP-1s is, well, this will almost have a side effect of you losing weight, but the main thing is to change how your body works, how your body responds to food, how your appetite responds to food, that what some people call food noise, the environment. They're very interesting food all the time. It just quietens that down.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the effect of weight loss in these drugs, it shifts where the fat is in the body to less harmful places. So it gets fat out of the liver and the pancreas, the organ that makes the insulin, and helps it work better. So it clears out some of the fuzzy pipes, if you want to say. So the machine works better. So you can still have a positive conversation where you're not focusing on how someone looks. There's a weight loss element. We don't use the S word. We don't use that word, but you can actually reshape it, but still hit quite hard. And I don't know if the right word is aggressive, active, directly help treat the underlying problems. So it manifests as size, weight, living with obesity, but you're actually tackling, and some of these new drugs that are coming out actually tackle the underlying inflammation. And which comes first, the inflammation or the weight gain or It's a difficult one. So we're actually looking at treating the underlying causes.
We wouldn't have any problems if somebody had, say, a heart attack, of putting them on various drugs as prophylactic medicines to reduce their risk of having a further heart attack or stroke or anything in the future. So if you identified someone as having a high risk, and that might be because they've got a very high cholesterol, because they've got a genetic condition which puts their cholesterol, you put them on a statin or whatever. So I don't have a problem with us medicalizing this to the point to say, okay, these drugs really work and they reduce your risk of getting diabetes, cancer, heart disease and things in the future if your BMI is above 35 or whatever. And I think that's probably how we're going to go. And that does take away the stigma a bit. And as you say, it then becomes a happy side effect that it loses. But at the moment, it's very much seen as a lifestyle choice.
But
and
being overweight is seen as a lifestyle choice.
Well, no, but being on
the
Ozempic or whatever,
being one of the skinny jabs.
And we don't know what the long-term effects of these drugs are. And we know that if you're going to start using them, you're going to have to use them long term, because as soon as you stop them, the hormones will reset themselves. Your body hormones are a real pain. One of our problems, as I understand it, from Rachel Batterham, who's a professor of nutrition in this area and understands the endocrine mechanisms far better than I do. But basically, once you've reached a weight, your body resets itself and all the hormones are set. That is your normal weight. So if you try and lose it, your body's then screaming at you to try and get back up to the weight you were. So it's a constant battle. So rather than laughing at people who are overweight or living with obesity, we should be feeling their bodies reset themselves. This is a constant, that their life is hard to try and get thin.
Tell me about. I'm both a premenopausal, postnatal woman. Tell me about it.
And it is a problem, this idea of this set points that you're describing. And if we look at the GLP-1 world we've entered, we don't have an exit strategy. We've invaded a country with no idea of what the new regime will be.
We do that all the time, though.
So it's either long-term use, which in the UK, our guidance doesn't have that yet. In England, Scotland, slightly different, to be clear. We haven't got data on the effect of changing body composition. There's hints that we might lose slightly more lean tissue, muscle, which we want, organs, which we want, compared to fat than other ways of losing weight, which you want to retain that. So we don't know the role of exercise with these drugs, because the way the trials have been funded, they haven't put physical therapy in there. We don't know the right time to put in the behavioural change and the nutritional changes. We've got hints that there might be higher risk of things like iron deficiency, B12 deficiency, because of the way they affect the amount of acid in our stomach. We don't know, because those trials haven't been done yet. So we need to screen carefully. One side effect we know of all weight loss, and we don't know the degree long-term with these drugs yet, is it reduces the density of our bones. So the one thing about being of a higher body weight is you're loading your bones so your bones stay stronger. There's a slight flip if you've got insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, that you can lose bone mineral, bone calcium quicker, but that's just, we don't know. So we need to look at the effect of exercise in here, so we don't get away from the exercise aspect, because we need to keep the muscles, we need to keep the bones. We don't know when to put the right dietary aspects in. Everyone's going protein crazy at the moment. Adequate protein is important. You don't need to go high protein and everything, because you need to maintain that muscle and the vitamins and minerals. And then you've got to think about how do you avoid constipation? If your appetite's dropped, you don't want to be eating all that fiber, because you might not be getting all the protein and other things. So we need a lot more awareness of how to healthily manage diet with these drugs in this new world we're in. In the meantime, there's segments of the food industry trying to work out what products can they develop for people on these drugs.
Yeah.
And is that to sell them more product, or give them the right product so they can maintain their weight loss journey?
I'm sure it's to sell more of the.
You might say,
or both.
Terribly cynical. They're surely out to make us feel better.
Yeah, sure.
Most of us will become parents at some point in our lives, and with parenthood comes a flood of new questions and worries, like, will my baby ever sleep through the night? When will I feel like myself again? And why on earth is their poo that colour? So much of what we hear about pregnancy, birth and raising children is built on myth, rumour and outdated advice. That's where the Science Baby podcast comes in. Hosts Dr Layla Battison and Dr Kim Bartholomew are science communicators, first-time mums and unapologetic nerds. Each episode we explore the evidence behind common parenting advice, bust some myths, share surprising facts about you and your child, and help you navigate this extraordinary, exhausting stage of life with confidence. Find the Science Baby podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
This also makes me think about, so we talk a lot about how the world around us impacts on our health in this show, and one of the things that I've been thinking about is, as useful as something like Ozempic or any of those jabs are, or any of the diets that are out there, they're also, as you said, talking about the protein, there's also these fads that exist in our society where we push certain ideals or ideas around what we think is healthy at one time. And
fermented foods is the one at the moment.
Yes, fermented food's been enjoying quite a period of popularity, actually. But when you think about, I was a teenager in the 90s, so the diet of choice was eat nothing, right? That was the look of the 90s, and it definitely influences me to this day because of that. But, there's been a lot of different diets that we've seen, and often repackaged as well. So I can remember the rise of the Atkins diet, right? The extremely low carb diet, high fat diet that existed. Well, versions of that have come and got right. And so now we have paleo, for example, where you're supposed to eat like a caveman, which is not really how cavemen eat, but anyway. Or the Fast 800 is an example of that as well. So how much do we think just these cultural changes around us also influence us? Because it's not just about what we're eating, but also what we view as acceptable in a body shape and a body size. And that's changed over time quite dramatically too.
The diets that I've seen over the past 25 years as a consultant, I would say the 5-2 diet is probably the one that I have most time for, because it allows you to reduce your calorie intake. All diets, Atkins, 5-2, 800, whatever, basically work because you reduce your calorie intake. There are side effects of having or not having certain types of food, but that's the bottom line. Fewer calories in, you will lose weight. But 5-2 is, A, it's livable with, because you're only feeling the pain on a couple of days, and B, it's not such a radical reduction that your body's going to come to harm. Our bodies are designed to be able to tolerate moments of famine.
My body is not designed for famine.
Well, one of the reasons that, certainly I put on weight easily. So, if a famine came along, I'd be laughing because I'm able to survive. My genetics means that I'm able to survive famine better than a very skinny person. The trouble is, then we don't live in a time of famine. We live in a time of excess, and therefore I will put on weight easily. And it comes back to the whole thing of our genetics that are driving us. So I think there will always be fad diets. There will always be things that people, somebody famous works and purports and it does well. But the bottom line is, if you eat fewer calories and you exercise more, you will lose weight. And that's a hard truth that I have to remind myself of. If I want to lose weight, I need to exercise more and take less calories in.
And I think there's a lot of repackaging because, we've got Banting's essay on Letters on Corpulence, which is the 19th century sort of letter that actually described what became the Atkins diet and the low carb diet we've seen before. There's a Regency physician who went to Bath, who I think he weighed 400 pounds, who advocated to the ladies of Bath to just eat salad. So these things are not new. That's a cabbage soup diet, essentially. These go through different repackaging. The paleo diet could be quite sensible if it didn't have things from all over the world that combine that no one human being could have got without air freight. So it's actually repackaged them in a way that's popular. We see that with food trends. We've gone for quinoa. Quinoa was a food of the working classes in Peru. They can't afford it now because everyone in the West wants to eat it. But no one wants to eat pearl barley, which is the equivalent from Europe. I heard a great story. It's a side to side from India where no one wanted to eat roasted aubergine. So they repackaged it as baba ganoush, and the middle classes started eating it again. The same dish, effectively. Slightly different spicing, but it's the same dish. So what we see is the repackaging of the new, the exciting, because what you're saying is we need to find a way of moderating our food energy intake, our food intake, by eliminating something. We just need to find the new way, and things like low carb work well because culturally we have a high carbohydrate food supply. So it's going against this food system. So we find something that goes against the food system. And if it goes against authority advice, we then form a club or a clique or a tribe, depending on how you want to describe it. And that then puts you against mainstream media, mainstream society, mainstream advice, and you've got a battle. And these groups tend to then do very well. And the truth is that there is not a perfect diet for human beings. We have evolved across a wide ecosystem, eating a wide variety of foods. We are the ultimate survivors and scavengers. If you look at it that way, that's why we've, apart from probably grass, we inhabit more of this planet than any other species. And we do that because we can adapt our diets. So that is why we do well in famine. That's why genetics drive us to eat. But also when we have an excess food spike, it becomes difficult.
Yeah.
And we need to recognize that. Our urban environments do not encourage us to be physically active. That's why if you take sort of the migration studies, say if you look from the Indian subcontinent, you've got sort of potential if we go into blue zones, that's a whole different topic. But you've got people living in the mountains of Pakistan who have very long life expectancies, low chronic disease risk, eating a very simple diet, doing lots of physical activity. You move them into the cities, levels of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease ramp up. You move them then from the cities in Pakistan to a city in the UK or another sort of economically developed country, the rates increase even higher. The food supply changes, the physical demands change, the whole environment changes, and our bodies can't adapt to that. So we need help.
But we shouldn't take that from the mainstream media we talk about fad diets, and you can think about some famous personalities that might present singing programs, or Michael Mosley, having mentioned 5-2 diet earlier, a huge amount of time for him, rest in peace. But a few years ago, not as a bet, but as a challenge, I decided I was going to follow the dietary advice of the Daily Mail
Oh,
every day.
okay.
And I was going to, any health advice and diet advice that was in the Daily Mail that day, and read it every day, which in itself was a challenge for me, reading the Daily Mail every day. But when I started this on New Year's Day, and I kept going, and I lasted 3 months, and
Wow.
I stopped for 2 reasons. Number one is that basically the advice was different every day. We were having to go to the supermarket and get something, and quinoa was one of them. And I can remember a box of quinoa being thrown across me in the kitchen saying, not another blinking, that's not the word that Nikki used, dietary change. And you just couldn't keep up with it. And some of the bits of advice conflicted with themselves. But to be fair, I did lose weight, and my blood pressure did go down with all this. So I was making healthy changes. The trouble was there were so many of them, and it was so confusing. Even I was committed to this project, it was impossibly hard work. So I think, how is the average person going to be able to follow this advice when they're being thrown at hundreds of different bits of advice every day?
Duane, you were talking about food noise, but there's also this external food
Mm.
noise, isn't there? That people are
Yeah.
trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. And we know that almost 50% of people now get their health advice off of social media and from influencers. And so now, how do you even figure out what is safe?
It is very, very hard. Is there an answer? Simple answer? Well, you can go to reliable sources who hopefully they're registered health professionals. As a dietitian, I'm going to be biased and put that as a declaration, but dietitians are legally bound to be honest. So if they're not, you can report them, but hopefully they are reliable and give you good advice. Look for the original sources. Don't even have press releases from universities. I've written on that and how unreliable they are. Because they're not peer reviewed. They've not gone through any sort of rigor as a press release, even from university. You need to engage with people who engage with the original sources, and always question. Probably number one red flag on any nutritional advice is if it's an absolute.
Mm.
This food will give you an extra 10 years. Can't say that. It may increase your chance of living longer, or if included with other things will have a benefit. So if it's not sort of wrapped up in that cotton wool ball of ifs and buts, it's likely to be overstated.
Interesting.
We don't like caveats, though, as a rule, do we?
Humans don't like them.
No.
We like simple messages. One in the nutrition world, which I sort of love, is the 5 a day message. 5 a day. Nice and simple. Bang, bang, bang. And everyone focuses on the fruits bits because they taste nicer. We don't go for 3 vegetables, 2 fruits, which is some other countries do. We promote more vegetables and a variety. It's a 5 a day. I remember many years ago as a sort of doing cardiovascular rehab and someone complaining they're putting weight on because they were having their 5 a day. It's 5 bananas. So you need to be put into context. We don't like caveats, but we need them to actually make sure we don't just follow a blinkered route.
I've been thinking about, as we've been talking about this, is you need a lot of time and a lot of money to do a lot of these things. And you need to have the ability and the opportunity to access the food that is healthiest for you. But we know that across Britain, there's all sorts of food deserts and fast food swamps where we get these areas where the only food in a local area is fast food. So how do we get ourselves out of that? Because some of us might think, okay, I'm going to eat more real food, quote unquote real food. I'm going to spend more time sitting down and eating it. I'm going to spend more time with people eating. I'm going to think about where my food comes from. But what if getting that started, just finding that healthy food to begin with is difficult, as it is for so many communities. And of course, most of those are poor communities in this country.
And you tend to find more takeaways in those communities.
Yeah.
Right. This is where if I had the multi-million pounds, I would actually take over some of those fast food places, connect up with the surplus food communities because there is fresh food in surplus, and set up sort of a training environment so you could actually train skills in cooking and get processing this food to not minimally processed, but the level of processing so they could be put in a fridge and make healthy ready meals with leftover ingredients and teach people how to do that. So you'd have like a community fridge, pay as you can sort of establishment. So you could actually set up quite a reasonable CIC, community interest company sort of model. So it could actually eventually be sustainable and actually use some of these environments to actually have community food spaces. That's if I had the money to do that. And that's how you actually, by having that example there. And we know we have surplus food. Surplus fresh food is really hard to deal with. You know, there can be pallets of chickens going off in one part of this area. You know, there's a load of vegetables going off. If you had some way of processing them, I should just say the word cooking, shouldn't I, really?
Yeah, cooking.
If you have a way of cooking them, chilling them the right degree, putting them in a fridge so someone can microwave a perfectly healthy meal, which has been minimally processed for that sort of meal, it's got to be a win because we're reducing food waste, we're potentially upskilling people and showing what healthy food can look like.
And we're making it affordable.
Without judgment.
Yeah.
We're actually taking out a commercial interest from the food industry, though. Is that going to be acceptable? Would it be fought against?
Depends which government's in at the time.
And is that the cause of our obesity? Commercial interest in food?
Well, food is treated as a commodity. Yeah, you can make money out of food without ever actually owning it. If you look at the futures market, things like sugar, grain, cocoa, that's the reason chocolate's more expensive. People are selling futures on cocoa that they're not even buying. Then it's going through intermediaries, which are not the people who make it, not the people who put it through the factories. It's the people who move between the two. They're the biggest companies in the food sector. So we have all these actors in the field, all these organisations or companies. Do we need to see food as a human right rather than a commercial entity? That's a challenge.
We're back with our good old friend, end stage capitalism. We seem to keep coming back to it. Is there anything in particular we want to make sure we say in today's episode?
I think my main message is with food, I think slowing down, sharing and enjoying it. We need to remember when we talk about food, we should enjoy it. Not just about sort of keeping going. You know, use it as a time to pause, time to enjoy, time to share.
Which is why breakfast is not the best meal of the day, because my time in bed is as long as possible. So my time on the bike getting to work is as short as possible. So I just don't have time for breakfast. If I want to create extra time to eat, which I do, I'll do that in the evening. Breakfast
is one of the meals that we share often in our house. I think because I've got small kids.
And you need to get them up and ready for school.
So we're all together and we're eating. Yeah.
And what I'd say about breakfast, if someone doesn't want to eat breakfast, my advice, professional advice would be make your first time you eat a sensible, healthy choice. Be in control of that decision and enjoy it. Because what happens in some people say, I miss breakfast and I go for crisps or a muffin. That's not a conscious, it's not a good choice. You've gone for a convenient, you've gone for a quick, you've gone for a hit.
Yeah.
So if you don't eat breakfast, that's not a problem. Not from a nutritional point of view, but make that first time you eat a good choice that you're going to enjoy and don't rush it.
Yeah, I think enjoying is really key. I saw something the other day and it escapes me where I suspect it might have been Shock Facebook, but where someone said, you know, there's no guilt-free food because guilt is not an ingredient. And it does make you think that our relationship with food and the way that people view it has changed quite a lot for us to perhaps just be healthier more generally and to think, why do we want to eat this thing and what does it do for us? And are we enjoying ourselves while we're doing it?
I wanted to do an experiment with chocolate because I did my PhD looking at chocolate. That's a whole other story. But I wanted to actually, and some of the subjects is giving people type 2 diabetes chocolate. And even though the instructions, guidance was not to change your diet, we had several people lose, most was 10 kilos in 12 weeks, being given a chocolate bar a day.
Okay.
But you go into it and you're looking at things on paper, it doesn't look like they've changed much. But that permission to do something. The next experiment, which I've never been able to do, is actually see if you can give people a small amount of chocolate, encourage and coach them to enjoy it, and see if they stop. Because all too often when we go for foods like chocolate, because of guilt and association, that desire for pleasure, we eat it very quickly, then feel bad, and then want more. Could we retrain ourselves to really enjoy what is actually quite a nice, tasty food, be very rich, very satisfying, something we can share, just by slowing down and learning to enjoy it?
So can I rewind? So that you give diabetic chocolate. And
there's normal chocolate to people with type 2 diabetes.
Oh, okay. And that was because although they weren't eating chocolate normally, they were eating other things.
Yeah.
that were substituting it, but were of
Possibly, we don't know because it didn't come up in the food diary. They didn't say they exercised more, but we had a couple that actually lost significant amounts of weight and go like, what's going on here? And is it because they're given permission to actually do something?
Or is it because they had to write food down?
But they were writing the food diary down before the study.
Because I find if I have to, because I hate counting calories, I find it very tedious. But if I do have to keep track of what I'm eating, then I think much more about it. And if someone has to read about it, then I really think about it.
But that's the whole point of a food diary. But it's detaching the guilt from it. It's going, am I doing this because I want to do it? Or am I just doing it out of impulse? So it's it's giving you control about the food you eat so you can actually benefit from it rather than it just being a sort of an action.
Yeah. Interesting.
Do you put much store on sort of locking cupboards and things as a way to stop people snacking?
Surely that doesn't work.
Again, because it's putting a very strong barrier there. Yeah, I'd probably go for a slightly looser version of having things individually packaged or set out. So you've got to make a deliberate act to go through that by putting a sort of a forbidding barrier of having a locked cupboard. If that's then left unlocked, you can sneak in. But if you actually go through the discipline act of actually, I'm having these little pots of whatever your favourite treat is.
Yeah.
You deliberately set that up so you're planning, and then it's the act of enjoying that. And, it's getting over that permission to enjoy that and actually really thrive in it, enjoying the nice things. Food tastes good. We're designed to like the taste of food. So why not enjoy it? Too often, because of the way society has guided us, we feel guilty. We're told we're bad because we do that. And we start building those judgments inside. And that internal stigma is very harmful. So if we can turn that around to the point of, no, I'm going to take my time and really enjoy this.
No, it's a good point. I saw something right after Christmas last year that was talking about what do you do with all the chocolate that's left over at Christmas. So especially in January when it's all kind of new you, new year, throw everything out, start all over again. I really enjoyed reading, and I forget where it was, this article about saying, well, if you took 3 heroes as an example, that's about, I think they said about 120 calories or something. They're like, just parcel out 3 of those, 3, until you run out of whatever leftover chocolate's there. And if you just eat one of those little bags every day, that's perfectly acceptable. It's 120 calories. You've enjoyed a little bit of chocolate, and you don't have to feel like, oh, well, the only way to deal with this is just eat all of the heroes all at once, and then it's gone in one day. And you haven't really enjoyed it, right? Because you just mainlined a whole bunch of chocolate. And then what was the point of all that? Sort of wasted time, effort, and calories.
And also you're fighting slightly against capitalism.
True.
But Tina Turner had it on the nail when she said, we don't need another hero.
I thought we banned you from dad jokes.
Sorry. I stopped myself.
Well, I think sorry, let me try that again. This has been a really interesting talk. I think we don't always think about food and eating and our relationship with food from all the different angles that we have, and it is very complex. So I wanted to thank Duane for joining us today, because this really made us think. It certainly made me think a lot more about food and our relationship to it.
This has been a Haunted Mouse production. Cut that out.